today.
Yeah. I want to listen to another cut. This is Martin Luther King Jr. talking about guaranteed income, perhaps one of the mechanisms for affecting this kind of redistribution.
It is precisely this collision of immoral power with powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our time. We must develop progress, or rather the program, and I can't stay on this long, that will drive the nation to a guaranteed annual income. Now, early in the century, this proposal would have been greeted with ridicule and denunciation as destructive of initiative and responsibility. At that time, economic status was considered the measure of the individual's abilities and talents. And in the thinking of that day, the absence of worldly goods indicated a want of industrious habits and moral fiber. We've come a long way in our understanding of human motivation and of the blind operation of our economic system. Now we realize that dislocations in the market operation of our economy and the prevalence of discrimination thrust people into idleness and bind them in constant or frequent unemployment against their will.
That was Martin Luther King Jr., of course, discussing guaranteed income. Dorian Warren, you have co-founded and are co-chair of the Economic Security Project, which has been kind of one of the big forces driving forward the discussion on, what people sometimes call universal basic income or an income floor or guaranteed income. Can you talk to me about, do you remember when you first heard Dr. King talking about this kind of thing? And at that time in your life, were you like, oh, that's just, we could do that? Or you were like, that's a crazy idea? How did you first see that?
Yeah, it was actually in the late 90s. I came across his speech he gave in 1967 at Stanford University in your neck of the woods, Alexis, where he also talks a lot about a guaranteed annual income and makes the case for it. He actually cites the numerical amount by the economist at the time, Kenneth Galbraith. And I was so struck because in the late 90s, we had just finished a very awful, horrific policy debate that those of us who care about poverty in this country lost, and that was welfare reform in 1996. So when I came across his thinking and quotes around guaranteed annual income, as he called it, I was struck and thought, that's just way out there. That's really Dr. King dreaming. And here we are. And here we are in 2023. And I have to mention my colleague and co-founder, Natalie Foster, who wrote a great piece yesterday in the New Republic talking about the 100 guaranteed income pilots in places around the country in the last 5 years. That is the expression, frankly, of where Dr. King's thinking and theorizing was at the time in campaigning. And it's especially there's a project actually in Atlanta and rooted in the same ward where Ebenezer Baptist Church is. And so that's a reason for optimism and hope around how far we've come from the late 60s. And I think as more and more people experience the idea of guaranteed income, not just in theory, but in fact, in these pilots, you might also include, and Natalie talks about this, the 6-month experiment around the expanded child tax credit in 2021, in which parents of children essentially got a guaranteed income for children for the first time in this country, which resulted in the lowest, let me say this super clearly, resulted in 6 months in the lowest child poverty rates ever in this country's history, especially for Black, Indigenous, and Latino children. So obviously that was a temporary measure, and we have to continue to fight to get it reenacted. But I'm just struck by how in the last 5 years this idea has gone from the margins to the mainstream. And I think if Dr. King were alive now, he would tell us to keep organizing. Last thing I'll just say on this, it's not lost on me that the effort around a guaranteed income in the 60s was really led by poor Black women who were on welfare, the National Welfare Rights Organization, who pushed, in fact, Dr. King on this idea. It's not like he came up with it all by himself, but he was really being pushed by other parts of the movement. I'm thinking of Johnny Tillman and National Welfare Rights Organization in particular, who really, really was advocating and organizing around this idea, which Dr. King and people choose to ignore this aspect of his thinking and strategy in the latter parts of his life. He was there on this idea, which in some ways was prophetic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you think about expansions to Social Security and stuff that occurred during the war on poverty. It's not like this is so far outside of like how we see taking care of vulnerable people in our society.